Okay. Yes. Now I am recording. Thank you, Leanne, for that reminder. I will ask the few of us from our early learning team that are here to do introductions. I am Julie Raymond, the Pre-K Expansion Consultant, working with all of you as you move through this second year of your MJRP grant and your Pre-K expansion. And I will pass it off to Leanne to introduce herself.
Thanks, Julie. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you today. I'm Leanne Larson. I'm the Director of Early Learning in the Department of Education. Our team is the team, as you know, where public pre-K is based. And I want to thank you all for making some time today. I know you're all really busy, but we appreciate you staying on top of the different pieces of this particular grant. And I will pass it to Marcy.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. We did have a 2-hour delay in our area, but school was open. Just so everybody knows. My name is Marcy Whitcomb. I'm the public pre-K consultant here on the early learning team, and I work with public pre-K programs and their partnership programs across the state. And I believe Michelle is here. I don't see her now. She's here.
Yes, I am. Thanks, Marcy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Belanger, and I am the Pre-K Partnership Specialist on the Early Learning team. So I am supporting community partners and SAUs in expanding the access to public pre-K. So it's nice to see everyone.
Thank you. And I neglected to include the slide that has the whole rest of our team, and many of you are familiar with many of them, but we will just keep going on. I also apologize. When I started recording, somehow I lost my little notes that were in front of me. So if I turn to the side a number of times, I apologize, but just to see the slides. So we will review a few grant deliverable reminders for you today about MOUs, about our technical assistance pages and surveys, and about enrollment. And then we have some inventory guidance for you regarding a couple riders. We will talk about the program self-evaluation, which is a requirement again this year in the grant. Leanne has some invoicing updates for everyone. And then we will talk about transitions to kindergarten, and of course, time for any questions that may come up. There we go. Okay, so our grant deliverables, if you have not already sent your MOU with CDS, if you could please send that to Nicole Medore. And those of you who have community partners that you're working with in this grant, if you could send that MOU to Nicole Medore as well. The technical assistant signature page. So that is sent along to you, to your SAU, when you get your SAU report following the meeting where we discuss alignment to 124 and your pre-K program in general. So that page must be signed by your superintendent and then returned to me. So please just keep that in mind when that comes along, or if you've already gone through that process, as a few of you have with me this year already, if you can just make sure that page has been returned. The technical assistance survey is not a requirement, just an ask that we ask your team to fill out, because this really helps us continue to develop and improve our TA supports out to SAUs. So we do appreciate if you can take a few minutes to do that survey. And we do also include a survey for teachers when we send them their class report. And then enrollment, just a reminder, when I email out and ask for enrollment that is related specifically to the MJRP classrooms and or seats that you have, so that may or may not be your total enrollment. I did send an enrollment form a little while ago. Marcy just dropped that in the chat for us. If your SAU, if nobody from your team has filled that out yet, if you could please make that a priority to get that filled out. And if you happen to send it in twice, that's okay. I'd rather just make sure I get all the information needed. Please note that in that enrollment form, we do differentiate between seats that are new and seats that have expanded. So some of you may have both, some of you may have one only, one or the other. So that would be either brand new seats that were created as part of this grant, or if you had classrooms that expanded from either half day to full day, or if they were part week and they've expanded to full week. Those are differentiated in the question. So if you could just pay attention to that as you are filling that out. And thank you, Marcy, for putting that in the chat. Just some general inventory guidelines. So we do recommend keeping an inventory list of all the new equipment and non-consumable materials purchased with grant fundings. So this inventory data would typically include an item description and or item number, the date of your purchase, the value, where you purchased it, the condition and the location of the item. It is also helpful to mark items in your classrooms that were grant funded, to mark them somehow so that they can be easily identified. And this leads us to some federal grant requirements regarding inventory. Much like last year, we did ask you to fill out the Rider G. Some of you will be familiar with that term. So equipment worth $5,000 or more in value must be inventoried annually for the grant throughout the period of the grant, and that's reported on the Rider G. If you do not have items that are $5,000 or more, please still submit a Rider G and just mark NA on the top line. You can see on your screen an example of how to save the form and label it when you send it to me. So it would be your SAU _ Rider G _ December 2024. We do ask that you complete this form again this year by December 30th. So coming right up, December 30th of 2024. And then just important to note that the Rider G this year should include all purchases of $5,000 or more that were made over the course of the grant. So that includes those larger purchases that were made last year. Those should be inventoried again this year on Rider G. And then requirements for disposing of equipment. We do have guidance on disposing of supplies or equipment in Rider I of your contract. The inventory and equipment that is less than $5,000 that was purchased through grant fundings can continue to be used to support your pre-K classrooms after the grant completion or other federally funded programs with no additional steps needed. You can just continue on. Supplies, equipment, property such as structures, those materials that are worth $5,000 or more may continue to be used within your pre-K programs. Or if you wanted to use them in another federally funded program, you would need approval. That would be reaching out to, I would say, Leanne on the early learning team at the DOE, and then she would reach out to U.S. Treasury and kind of go through the steps with you for that. Similar to that, Rider I, like I said, provides guidance on disposing of or selling materials and equipment that were purchased with grant funds that you no longer need. And then similarly, you would need permission for that. So it would be reach out to Leanne Larson and she would contact U.S. Treasury and go through the steps to get permission for that. Anything to add on to that, Leanne?
No, you did a great job, Julie. Really, the most important is that you reach out and notify us, because we're going to then have to notify, as Julie said, U.S. Treasury, and then they will probably ask some questions, and that will help them to determine what the allowability of the use of the equipment or property would be, and or whether or not you would need to return any amount of funding to U.S. Treasury. So we take it one step at a time.
Okay, so continuing on the self-evaluation, we have some resources. I will be sharing out the recording, the slide deck, and then I'll have some links that I will share out. So like last year, all SAUs were required to complete a program self-evaluation. So you will be asked to do this again for this year. Those will be due June 30th of 2025. So we're just going to kind of remind you every so often throughout the year that those are coming up and that you should be thinking about what you'll be including in that. It was written into your original grant proposal too, if you want to go back and look at that. We do have the public pre-K self-assessment and continuous quality improvement tool available for you to use. You are not required to use the tool that we created, but it is a good tool that you may choose to use or use as a springboard and include other information. That tool is developed by the early learning team. The tool, and really any way you choose to do your self-assessment, it's intended to do as a team. And for those of you that do have partnerships, ideally you should have representation from all those partnership agencies. So be keeping that in mind as you're going along through the school year, that you don't save it till just the end of June and then you're scrambling. So try to work with those partners to find time to complete that tool. And really this is to inform your practice, your alignment to Chapter 124, and then really just to look at your program and how you can continue to improve in providing high quality public pre-K. I will send along, as you see noted on the screen, a couple of parent surveys. That's a great piece of information to include. We've gathered a couple sample parent surveys over the last few years, so those samples will be sent to you should you choose to use them or adapt something similar to them. And then some other pieces of information that you can consider including in that self-evaluation. Of course, your enrollment numbers. You may choose to include attendance data, student performance indicators, any family engagement data that you've collected. So mental note, maybe you want to start collecting some family engagement data. And then, like I mentioned, those parent surveys, you can include that data.
Julie,
And yes.
I'm going to pause you real quick because there's a question in the Q&A.
Okay.
Based on the last slide, which I think was maybe 2 slides ago, does that mean that after the length of the grant, items under 5,000 can be used in pre-K classrooms not funded by the grant without approval?
That's a great question. You still need to seek approval, and we have to seek that from US Treasury. But generally, they're pretty good about the use of resources for similar purposes as what was funded through the grant. But in all cases, for equipment, $5,000 or more, if you're going to want to use that in another way after the grant, reach out to us first. We'll connect with US Treasury. We'll gather any information, and then we'll get their ruling on how to proceed. That would be in your best interest.
Thank you, Marcy. I didn't see that come through. And I will actually continue to let Leanne have the floor.
Yeah. Thanks, Julie. All right, so invoicing. Some of this, if you were on our session in the fall, will be a repeat, but really want to stress the importance of regular invoicing. It is much better if it's possible for you as a school system to be submitting invoices to us on a regular cadence, whether that is monthly or every other month, than waiting until the end of the year and trying to submit everything at that point. It can become just very overwhelming to try to work through all of the evidence, and then a lot of back and forth ends up happening that probably would be less arduous if you're on a regular cadence of invoicing. So I want to start by just really encouraging all of you to do that if possible. We recognize that in your business offices, especially this fall, you are swimming in invoicing for all of the federal money that has been coming to closure. So we've been trying to just kind of sort of sit in the background and not say much about the invoicing for this grant for the time being, just because we know how much is on your plates. But as that comes to closure and we move forward after the first of the year, if you could get on a regular cadence, that would be wonderful. And happy to help if you have questions about that. When you are invoicing, please remember that you need to be using the invoice cover sheets that are found in the Teams folder that your business office has access to. That always has to accompany all of the backup for reimbursement. It's very helpful if when it is submitted, you make sure that the invoice cover sheet is a separate document from the file that has all of your backup. Because in the end, when we approve an invoice, we're just going to be moving forward the invoice cover sheet. The Department of Finance is not going to store all of your backup. That's on us at the Department of Education to do that. So that's why we have the folder setup that we do. So if you could just make sure that always have the invoice cover sheet as a separate document from the rest of your backup. Anything that you can do to help kind of cross-reference backup that you're offering is welcomed and appreciated. Some folks like to break the different pieces up from each line. So you might put everything from the 3,000 line in one file, 4,000 line in another file. Some people like to just number it. Some people write little notes to us on it, and that's really helpful. It will often just save us needing to come back and ask questions if we're not sure about the allowability of an expense. When you are going in to get your invoice cover sheet, please make sure that you are using the version that is named 2023 to 2025. That is because any of you that have had money added to your contracts this year through an amendment, that version, the total at the bottom has been updated to reflect the total value of the contract. You will need to go into the top section to add those additional dollars into the accounting section up at the very top to bring that up to date with your additional awarded amounts. Certainly, if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to me and I'm happy to walk you through that. The other thing to always make sure that you do with your invoice cover sheet is to sign it. If you don't sign it when it is submitted, then we end up returning it or having to reach out and get a signature, and that can slow down reimbursement. As a reminder, all funds that you have been awarded have to be obligated by June 30th of 2025. Any obligations that were, if they were to happen after that date, won't be allowable underneath your particular grant awards. So we appreciate you really working to make sure that those funds have been obligated by that point, because in the end, we do not want to have to return any money to US Treasury if possible. Our state obligation date is coming to a close on the 30th of this month. All subrecipients, which are all of you as grantees, have a longer window of time. So in your case, you have through June 30th of 2025 to obligate. After that, all invoices must be submitted by September 30th. So you have about 3 months to pull together any final invoices. And then once the final invoice has been received and paid, we will disencumber your contract at that point. And our hope at that time is that there will be no money remaining because we don't want to have to return that. So please, if you're taking a look as you go through the spring and think, oh, this is not costing what we had anticipated, talk to us about that. Maybe there's another need that would be allowable under your grant, and we can work with you on how to accommodate that. It may require an amendment, but those are generally pretty easy for us to process on your behalf. Speaking of amendments, please remember the 10% rule. In any of your approved budgets, you are allowed to move up to 10% of funding from one line to another, because we realize that it's not an exact science when you're developing a budget. And that doesn't require any permission. But if you are going to need to move more than 10% from one line to another, that does require pre-approval, and it will almost always require an amendment to be filed on your behalf. So before moving money or making a decision to spend money that hasn't already been approved, talk to us and let's work through the amendment so that we can get that in place before you make those purchases. That way we are in a good place to be able to reimburse. What sometimes happens is that we'll receive an invoice where you might have gone over the 10%, or maybe you purchased something that wasn't approved originally. We are not going to be able to pay that invoice until we deal with the amendment. And that just slows down everything. And it's also not helpful if an expense was incurred that isn't allowable, because then we would have to say to you, we can't reimburse that, and we don't want to be in that position. We don't want you to be in that position. The last, two more things that I wanted to mention. Please be aware that the Davis-Bacon, I think I wrote that backward on there. Sorry about that. It should be, I think it's Davis-Bacon. I always get those reversed. Was a ruling that indicates that with the use of federal funds, if you are using those for construction purposes, so if you were engaging in some retrofitting, let's say, of a classroom space, and you are using a contractor outside of your own school system, you need to get bids for making that determination about who you're using. So just be aware of that. I think most of you did retrofitting already, if that were the case. It's not an issue if you're able to do it with using your own school staff, like your maintenance staff, if it's something they're able to engage in. You don't have to go through that process, but if you have to get an outside contractor to do that work, then you are expected to do that. Mentioning that because it has come up in audits already for some of our federal relief funding. So just want to try to be proactive in making sure people realize that. And then the final thing that I wanted to give an update on is that we are still working to replace our contract grant specialist for this particular project. We thought we had a person to hire, and then that didn't end up working out. So we had to put it back out. We have been interviewing this week for that position, and hopefully we will get it filled sometime shortly after the first of the year. In the meantime, Terry Beal is continuing to manage the invoices, but it will be a slower process because it's something she does above and beyond her regular job. So she has a certain number of hours to give us on a weekly basis. So please hang in there. We are recording all invoices as we receive them and trying to work through them as quickly as we can. In the meantime, also until that position is filled, I'm the person to reach out to if you need to talk about a contract amendment. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to me if that's the case. I think that's everything on this topic.
Thank you, Leanne.
There's one question that came to me. The Rider G, where do we send that? Who receives that?
That would go to me. Okay. So
I'm pretty sure everybody has your email, but I'll put it in the chat anyway.
Okay, and I will include that information on the email that goes out once I have the recording saved to share, and I will share out the slides. Okay, a few more things, just some reminders about technical assistance for this year. With it being the second year of the grant, it is just one visit out to your programs and classrooms, still using the class observation tool, the interactions and the environment tool. So it'll be just that one visit and one leadership meeting that we hold. I will periodically send check-ins via email, particularly in times of the year where you may not be scheduled for a visit. So those of you who I haven't visited yet, you'll be getting those check-ins in the next few days and weeks. Even though it is just the one visit this year, we are available for support throughout the year and really just ongoing, even when the grant wraps up. So please, like Leanne said earlier, do not hesitate to reach out to anyone on the early learning team. You can reach out to me as your pre-K expansion consultant, and then I can kind of direct you where you may need to go if it's not something that I can answer. Also, with that being said, please reach out to me if you have any technical assistance needs, things that come up either before I go out and do your visit, or maybe I've done your visit and in February something comes up. Please do not hesitate to reach out. We have some ongoing professional development offered by the early learning team. We are just about to complete, actually this afternoon, a challenging behavior module series, and then we will put that out again. And I send all that information to both all the the SAU contact names that I have, but I also share it widely with teachers when we have something new going out. We do have a text study that was widely popular. That registration has closed, and we do have a wait list, but a text study is something that we will look to do again. We will be running a few series of this one particular text study, and I think those are already all full, and emails are going out to those. And many of you on the screen had staff that signed up for it, which was excellent to see. We do have early learning team office hours available the second Thursday of the month. So that is coming up this week. Little plug for that. And just to note, last year, some of you joined some of those, and we focused those really on pre-K last year. It was pre-K open office hours. This year, we're taking the focus of all of early learning. So anything pre-K to third grade, please pop in and have discussions with us. We'd love to see you. And then if you can just mark your calendars, you should have these dates already, but just to keep them in mind, March 6th at 9 a.m. for one of our quarterly meetings, the next one. And then in May, we will meet again May 15th at 9 a.m. as kind of our final meeting, and guiding you through wrapping up the grant process. And then as part of our TA, we like to give you a little bit of information. So I'm going to turn it over to Marcy to talk about transitioning to kindergarten.
Thank you so much. So I know it's December, but very quickly, children are going to be starting to, or everybody's going to be starting thinking about transitioning to kindergarten. And there's a little bit of information. We have a web page that I will put in the chat, web pages with a lot of information, resources and tools for parents and caregivers, for our providers and educators, and then a module series about building a transition plan. So the transition refers to the process of a child moving from one program to another. And when that happens, there's a lot of new adjusting to new settings, including rules and expectations, structure, program structure, classroom structure, that sort of thing, new ways of learning, new relationships with adults and their peers, and then of course physical surroundings, not to mention bus rides and a whole bunch of other things that they're not used to, being in the cafeteria, that sort of thing. So we like to talk about this because it's not only the children that we're talking about, it's really families that go through this transition as well. It's also providers that go through the transition and educators. And so what we've learned through research is that there is a persistent gap in transitioning, meaning that there's a lot of information that's not necessarily shared and a lot of things that we could do to support this transition. Next slide, please. So one of the things we talk about when we're looking at transition, and that has sort of like a interesting answer, but it's school readiness. So we talk about kindergarten readiness. It's a really big question because we don't, like, what does that really mean? A lot of times our specific or individual SAUs in schools will have their own sort of meaning, and it's really important that that is like a universally known through your providers in your community, through your families and your parents and your caregivers, and then also through your school. So it's important to know that children are not innately ready or not ready for school. Learning and development is done on a continuum, so children are not developing at the same rate or learning the same things at the same times. A lot of it has to do with foundational learning, their experiences, their opportunities, that sort of thing, and we don't always know that before they come into kindergarten. So the question is, what do children in Maine have to be considered ready for kindergarten? And there's actually one answer to this question. And if anybody just wants to shout it out, that's great. But if not, I'll give the answer. Okay, so the answer is the child needs to have a birthday on or before October 15th of the current school year. And that is the one thing they need to have to be considered kindergarten eligible. So when we consider that, we also consider that we have children coming into our schools with, less opportunity than other children, less experience. Maybe they have a current IEP, maybe they have a 504. There's a lot of things that we may not know when children come in, developmentally, that sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is, if they have that birth date, then they are eligible for kindergarten. So what we really want to talk about is that transitions are two-sided. In this case, we're looking at the sending program or experience and the receiving schools. So this is also something to consider when you have a public pre-K classroom, which you all do, because even though they're transitioning in the same school, it's still a really big transition, because we do know that our public pre-K programs and our kindergarten programs are still a little bit different. Something to consider when you're looking at your sending programs is that the children that are coming to you, whether they're if you're universal, maybe you'll have all of them in your public classroom. Even if you are considered universal, you still may not have all of those children. You may have children, moving into town. You may have children that have just been home that didn't want to attend a public pre-K program, that sort of thing. But it's really important to realize and understand that all of our children come from very different experiences, and not all of their experiences are considered accessible or high quality. And so this little diagram here is one of my favorites, and it just kind of shows to have us be mindful of where our students are coming from. So we have children who have never attended a program, they're home all day. Maybe they've been in a full day public pre-K in your school or in a different district, or a half day program, child care center or a family child care center, family friend or neighbor care. Depending on your community, we have children who are, at work with parents all day. Disrupted educational experience, maybe they're migrant families or they're moving into our state and new Mainers. Special education, pre-K, a special purpose program, transitional or developmental kindergarten, or Head Start. Those are just most of the examples, but there sure are other ones out there. So what's really important is to really consider building a relationship with your community programs, who are not necessarily your programs in partnering for your pre-K program, but they are certainly your program in your early care and education system. One thing I like to say is the early education and care system in our state is sort of the overlying system. And then within that, we have a bunch of smaller systems. So we have our public schools, we have all of the things listed on the screen, our Head Starts, our child care, our family child care centers. And what's really important to remember is that these are folks that have worked with these children and families for, maybe since the children were born, maybe for just a year, but they have a lot of information and they know a lot of things that they can share with us when we're transitioning children to kindergarten, so that we're able to meet those children and families where they are when they come into our schools, which is really important, because if we don't have, supports and modifications and things in place because we don't know who's coming to us, we're not setting our students or our families up for success. So I'm a big research person, and I like to talk, I talk about this particular subject a lot. And so I like to back it up by research. So some of the research that I pulled that I think is really important is it's estimated that 72% of our children who may experience challenges with transition to kindergarten, TTK, underscoring the critical importance of supporting children and families during this vulnerable period. So 72% of children nationally is a lot of children who have challenges. And then, of course, their families are having challenges. Rural families may also need more transition supports, as research documents that this population has less access to high quality early care and education programming, and rural families tend to communicate less with educators during the transition process. And there's a number of different reasons for this. They may not have connection to the school. They may be new to the school. They may have had a negative experience of their own in school. So there's a lot of reasons why it's really important to reach out to, to really make an attempt to reach out to all of our families during this time. And then one study of transition to kindergarten efforts found that the only practices significantly linked to children's outcomes were in-person meetings between Head Start and preschool programs and kindergarten teachers. This is really important because we have all, like I said, the umbrella, and then all of the systems underneath it, Head Start and preschool programs and, family child cares and private child cares. And again, if we're sharing all of those with our kindergarten teachers, that is significantly linked to children's positive outcomes because we're again meeting children where they're at and families where they're at. So one last thing, I didn't know if that was my last slide or not, but one last thing I want to say is, we have children who come into public schools, and then we have children who graduate out of our public schools, and they're there for a number of years. And we make a really big deal when children graduate, right? We have our friends, our families, our childcare providers who worked with them when they were 2 years old. Everybody's excited. There's a big celebration. There's a big ceremony. And the question that I would like to leave you all with is, why do we not have as big of a ceremony and make it as special when our children come into public school as when they leave public school?
Thank you, Marcy. So just to wrap us up today, we are available for any questions, discussions that you have regarding our the Pre-K Expansion Grant. Contact information is on your screen. There's my email, Marcy's email. We have Nicole Medor's email on there, and I did see earlier that Marcy had dropped Leanne's email into the chat. And then one more final plug for our office hours. You can see that on the screen that is coming up this Thursday. So with that, if anybody has questions, please unmute and let us know if you have questions. And Marcy did just drop another link into the chat for transitions into kindergarten.
Before we have questions, I did want to say one thing that I forgot to say is that we have been running through our preschool development grant an opportunity for technical assistance and a mini grant award for building transition teams and year-long transition plans into kindergarten. We are running a first round right now, and I'm not exactly sure when, but there's a possibility of running a second round sometime early spring. So if you're interested in learning more about that, please send me an email.
Thank you. So any questions, just go ahead
Johanna,
and unmute. Oh,
Pastor.
Johanna, yep,
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was wondering, I think I don't have the May date down for the grant meeting. I was wondering if you could go back maybe like 4 slides to what those dates were. Maybe it was more than 4. Okay, May 15th. Great, thank you very much.
I just realized I was muted during that. May 15th, yes. Any other questions? And if you do not have questions, you are welcome to log off when you're ready. Thank you again for joining us today. Great to see you on the screen, and I will see you in person later in the year. Many of you, some of you, I just saw recently. So again, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us.
I hope everybody gets a little downtime at the end of the year.
Yes.
Thank you.